I left San Francisco in 2015 after living there for 13 years, but I still very much consider myself a Bay Area writer. You know, every October, something in me says, oh, it's Litquake time, because I participated in the festival so many years running, and I miss it very much. I miss the Bay Area. And so I'm really happy, even under these circumstances, to get a chance to reconnect with Litquake and with Bay Area readers. So tonight's panel, or tonight's group reading, We All Want to Change the World, Stories of Resistance and Revolution. This is a little bit of, in some ways, an encore performance. We did a similar group reading with most of the same readers at the AWP conference in San Antonio last month. The impetus for the event is, I reached out to all of these writers because I felt like we maybe had some of the same perspectives, same experiences. In my case, I've just published a novel called The Gringa, came out on Melville House in early March, right before the pandemic was declared. And it's a very political book. It takes place mostly in Latin America in the aftermath of Peru's dirty war against the Shining Path. But it's also narrated about 10 years later by an American who has left the United States in the wake of 9/11 and the Iraq invasion and the disgraceful abuses at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. So it's a very explicitly political novel, and one of the many things I struggled with in writing it over the course of 8 years was a kind of programming or indoctrination that I'd received over the years in workshops, from teachers, from editors, from people in the publishing industry, basically saying, you know, stay away from politics, right? I mean, that good American fiction shouldn't really be dealing with issues like this. You know, I would hear this in workshop, you know, a real preference for the kind of quieter, suburban, domestic stories. I would hear it from editors who really felt very sure that readers just weren't interested in reading political fiction. But this was a story I really wanted to write, and so I had to struggle against that. I had to kind of deprogram myself over the course of those 8 years. And when I've talked to a lot of writers whose work does have political content, I often hear the same thing, that you have to kind of push back against certain kinds of values in the mainstream publishing world. And so all of my co-readers tonight, who we will introduce one at a time, but just to name check them here: Kirstin Chen and Danielle Evans, Joshua Furst, Ramona Ausubel, some of my favorite writers. And these are all writers who go there. I mean, who are not afraid to take on political issues, to include political material in their work. And I'm talking about geopolitics, I'm talking about military issues, I'm talking about economics, I'm also talking about artistic issues. I'm talking about what we might think of as literary politics, that idea that there's one American literature, or that there are certain conventions that have to be followed in order to make editors happy, in order to appeal to readers. And so many of our writers also push back against that in their own work by breaking with convention, by taking risks that you're not really supposed to take, and by really kind of working outside of the very narrow and conservative box of conventional American literary values, which is also a really important political act. So there are 5 of us. We're each going to read for 8 or 9 minutes. Each one of us will introduce the next reader when we're done. And at the end of this all, if any questions have come in through social media, we will try to take a few minutes to answer them, or we might have a little talk amongst ourselves about some of the issues that we've tried to confront in our work. I think it'll be a good time. So here we go. I have the great honor of introducing the first reader of the night, my friend Danielle Evans. Danielle is the author of the story collection Before You Suffocate Your Own Fool Self, and the forthcoming collection, The Office of Historical Corrections. She's the winner of the PEN American Robert W. Bingham Prize and the Hurston Wright Award for Fiction, a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree, and a 2020 National Endowment for the Arts Fellow. She teaches in the writing seminars at Johns Hopkins University. So welcome everybody to We All Want to Change the World. Take it away, Danielle Evans.
Thank you guys for hanging out with us. Thank you, Andrew, for putting this together and for inviting me again, even though the first time I kept calling it the wrong thing. I kept telling everyone it was called Everybody Wants to Rule the World. This time I got confused about time zones, told everybody the wrong time. So I'm not very combobulated, but I am very excited to be in conversation with this group of writers. I'm going to read a short section of the novella that's in my forthcoming collection. Both the novella and the collection are called The Office of Historical Corrections. Last time I kind of jumped right into tragedy, and I don't know, this week has been like not super happy for me. I hope everyone else is having a better week, but just in case, I thought I'd read like the least depressing section of the novella. So I think all you need to know to follow where I'm starting about 20 pages in is that the narrator's name is Cassie. She works for an agency that's called the Institute of Public History, the Institute for Public History, rather. This is set in a fictional near future where the government is employing out-of-work historians to serve as public factors, which is a kind of complicated and controversial project. Cassie has just been summoned to a meeting with her boss. She doesn't know why, and we are going to meet her nemesis learn about her nemesis for the first time. I read the note, but it was inscrutable. I could not recall being involved in anything controversial lately. My recent corrections had been rather uniformly underwhelming, but our supervision was so generally lax that I felt like I'd been called to the principal's office. The director had been running a prestigious university as Ethnomusicology Institute before he'd been invited to steer the organization. While he managed most days to look the DC part in suits and close cropped hair, and he kept all the Institute's moving pieces more or less moving, he had the energy of a man who had intended to spend his golden years playing guitar on the beach and was daily bewildered by what had gone wrong. Cassie, he said when I walked into his office, we have a Genevieve problem. It might take some legwork to sort out. He tapped a folder on his desk, a clarification request. The requests that made it past initial review were mostly cases where the historian's initial correction had been overzealous, frequently violations of Guideline 6. We do not posit certainty where facts are actually murky or disputed, or intervene in a dispute over something so trivial that the relevant information cannot be verified except by weighing the accounts of disputing parties. Presently, though, the Institute was working its way through a backlog of clarification requests, all triggered by the recently departed Genevieve Marchand. Genevieve had been gone from IPH for 6 months, but she'd been regularly reappearing as my nemesis for most of my life. We first met in the 4th grade, when Genevieve was still Jeannie and had, until the moment of our introduction, been the only Black girl in her class at the private school where I landed a scholarship. Our parents moved broadly in the same Black professional circles, but my father was a lawyer who had started with the Bureau of Consumer Protection and then moved into the sort of lawyering that advertised on the radio stations that were banned in Jeannie's home. No money, no problem. At 1-800-TROUBLE, your lawyer gets paid when you do. Jeannie's mother was a sitting judge. My mother had recently moved from civil rights work in the Department of Justice to civil rights work in the Department of Education. Jeannie's father owned part of a tech company and had his name on the wing of our school. My parents were first-generation upper middle class, and Jeannie's were nearly as old as Black money got to be in the US, which is to say, not very old, but extremely proud of it. My parents and I were invited over to their house after my first week of school. In the middle of the dessert course, Jeannie's father said, "She's so well-spoken for having been in public school until now." And my mother grimaced and launched into a defense of public schools, and my father politely waited for her to finish and then said, "When your baby's really brilliant, you don't need to pay for someone to tell you so. You wait for the opportunities to come to you." Jeannie's father hinted that my scholarship was possible because of funds they'd earmarked for the recruitment of minority students. My mother said true charity wasn't boastful, and Jeannie's mother noted that the Bible verse my mother was trying to quote was actually about love. That was how joint family dinners went for the following decade, but they continued to happen several times a year. At the dinner table, Jeannie was a proper young lady, and I was a mouthy child being raised in a home where I'd never been told children should be seen and not heard or stay out of grown folks' business. Beyond our parents' watch, Jeannie had plenty to say. She did not so much actively dislike me as disdain me. Her favorite thing to do was pronounce something I was doing or wearing or simply was to be confusing. "Your hair is confusing me," Jeannie said the first day we met, with an air of genuine concern that never entirely went away or became less grating. In both our households, there were a series of party pictures of the two of us, one per party each year from childhood to adolescence. I liked myself fine when looking at myself, but in photos with Jeannie, a former Gerber baby, Belle the Jack and Jill debutante ball, I looked sulky, ersatz. It was too late for the era when prestigious institutions would acquire one minority and stop, but too soon for there to be enough of us that we had the option of avoiding taking a position on one another. We grew up circling each other, each aware of the ways that we that the other highlighted our deficiencies. I went to college expecting to be mostly rid of Jeannie. For the 4 years we spent at well-regarded institutions on opposite coasts, I became accustomed to her absence. But at the party Jeannie's parents threw for her graduation, we discovered we were both headed directly to the same PhD program. Ready to believe in the comfort of the familiar, we tried that first year to be real friends, went on study dates and girls' nights and salon outings, built the trappings of a closeness that never quite took. We were the only two Black women in the department, discounting faculty, grad student, staff, and for 4 out of 5 years, undergraduate majors. And in our first year, I was constantly correcting people who got the two of us confused, her similar hair and coloring enough to override that Jeannie was 5 inches taller and 3 dress sizes smaller than I was. The confusion eventually faded because professors in the program liked me fine, but they loved Jeannie, and in that way they came to be able to tell the difference between us. Our pretense at true friendship also faded. In my telling, Jeannie discovered she didn't need it, and in Jeannie's telling, I discovered I didn't want it. It was true, I admit. Away from Jeannie, I had the peculiar confidence of only children, the boldness that came from being doted on, but alone often enough to be oblivious to my own strangeness. In Jeannie's presence, I felt revealed by the only nearby witness to my life as a whole. At the end of our first year in the program, I visited my parents, who were in the suburbs now. They had given up on DC rent and moved to PG County, and told them there wasn't anyone to take it seriously in my small white university town. A week later, we drove into DC for Jeannie's parents' annual summer white party, where Jeannie announced her engagement to James Harmon III, a Black doctor who just finished his residency there. Jeannie got married the summer after our second year, just before her husband started to work at the university hospital. I was invited, but I was teaching a summer class and couldn't cancel sessions. I sent, via my parents, my apologies and a Vitamix. My research area was protest movements of the 20th century, and Jeannie's was material culture in the 17th century, which meant although we were both Americanists, after our first year of school, we generally shared only one class a semester and saw less and less of one another. By our third year, Jeannie and her husband had moved into a spectacular townhouse at which she volunteered to host the annual grad student end of year party. In previous years, the party consisted of chips and beer in an overheated basement apartment or supermarket cheese plates in the student union room. But Jeannie's party was catered except for the gingerbread bundt cake she baked and iced herself using her grandmother's recipe. Professional bartenders in a black tie were on hand serving cocktails named after schools of historical thought. Jeannie drank only the Great Man, which was actually a mocktail, and confided in me that she was pregnant. I congratulated her genuinely and felt resentful that I could not allow myself even a moment of smug anti-feminist joy to think that motherhood might slow Jeannie down or at least keep her off the job market when it was my turn. At least I'm having a 20s, I thought, though my 20s, which I treated with a cast down your bucket where you are approach, had thus far only brought me a string of men who were all very sad about some quality in themselves they had no intention of making any effort to change. I took a sip of my Marxist, a vodka cocktail made with such high-end alcohol that first sip I hadn't recognized it as vodka, having until that party believed it was the essence of vodka to have an aftertaste like astringent. Jeannie went straight from grad school to a fabulous job the same year I headed off for my visiting position. When I landed the tenure track job a year later, she sent a note of congratulations written on stationery from her own higher-ranked university. For years, I had only peripheral knowledge of her life, talks and publications, family photos shared on social media. She and James had a daughter, Octavia, who appeared to take to the camera the way Jeannie had as a child, and I watched her grow from baby-faced to long-limbed and theatrical. There had been no note of congratulations when I joined IPH, and when Jeannie and her family stopped appearing in my social media feeds, I thought maybe I'd been downsized from her friends roster, having become professionally unimportant. When she reappeared, to my astonishment, it was to join IPH 2 years after I had. She was divorced, parted from her tenure track job in her pre-tenure year under murky circumstances rumored to involve a lawsuit, and shaved her hair down to a crisp mini afro and no longer went by Jeannie. It was Genevieve now. The Jeannie I remembered would have had expansive ideas about our mission, but would have spent years charming the director into coming around them while parroting her parents on the virtues of treading lightly. Genevieve said in our first office meeting during her first week that we were tiptoeing around history to the point that we might as well be lying to people. She wanted a guideline emphasizing that lies of omission were still lies. In the field, she invented a sign quoting the Declaration of Independence with portions of the worst of notes on the state of Virginia. She was instructed not to come back to the National Portrait Gallery after she stood in front of paintings for hours telling viewers about his abuse of underage Tahitian girls. She made a tourist child cry at Mount Vernon when she talked about Washington's vicious pursuit of his runaway slaves, and she was formally asked by the only Virginia field historian to avoid making further corrections in the state. The following month, she talked her way into the Kennedy Center and corrected hundreds of programs for that evening showing of a beloved musical where George Washington was written as the kindly paternal figure, noting that in real life, Washington had not been a jovial singing Black man and including an extensive list of his atrocities. She protested when our director reprimanded her, not in the state of Virginia when she made the correction. That was the only Genevieve clarification I had been previously called in for, less a clarification really and more a minor PR campaign. I got complimentary tickets to the show and brought Daniel. A picture of us in the audience ran on the agency account, along with an apology for having overstepped. We know the difference between history and artistry, the post said. I didn't write it, I didn't work online, and Elena had refused the assignment. The actual text was written by one of the two white men named Steve, who I couldn't always tell apart because I'd never learned their last names. IPH hadn't needed me to weigh in, they'd only needed my face to show that I was one of the reasonable ones. My face only barely held up its part of the bargain. In the picture, Daniel looked physical, and I was grimacing. I'd never seen the show before and was inclined to agree with Genevieve's critique about her methods. I didn't say any of that to the director, but I took Genevieve out for a drink at an upscale black-owned bar on U Street to apologize. We had socialized minimally since she started at the agency, and though we blamed it on working mostly outside of the office and Genevieve juggling joint custody, I knew it wasn't scheduling that stood between us. I was sincere enough in being sorry for my role in things that we left the bar almost on good terms. On the way back to Metro, we passed a bar with a young and multiracial crowd in the weekly hip-hop and classic rock dance party. Its name, Dodge City, was a nod to both its country western decor and DC's derogatory nickname from the 90s, when the city was the country's murder capital, and so many people, most of them young and black, were killed in its streets that a joke about the likelihood of being shot became a way of saying where you were from. Genevieve wanted to go inside and footnote the bar's name on the cocktail menu with an explanation of the violence it referenced, and I had to threaten to call the director before she relented. I walked home, furious at still being the bad guy, and also remembering the way Genevieve's parents had talked about the revival of U Street when we were children, the way Genevieve had adopted their disdain in adolescence, how much they'd spoken of the city's past and future, how little they'd wanted to be connected with the Black people living in its dilapidated present until most of them had been pushed out. Where it was the correction for that? Genevieve gave up on me again. For her remaining time at IPH, our interaction stopped at cordial acknowledgement. It was the kind of tension that in the beginning seemed it might be resolved, but went on long enough that the grievance settled, turned so solid that trying to make pleasant chit-chat around it would have felt disrespectful. Besides, I knew if I did resolve things with her, I'd end up in the middle of whatever battle she picked next, and I couldn't afford that. I told myself that in the Institute's good graces, I could still do some good. If it had only been the occasional play or bar that Genevieve raised a fuss about, she might have lasted longer. But Genevieve's most persistent and controversial grievance was the passive voice atrocity. Wherever there was a memorial, she wanted to name not just the dead, but the killers. She corrected every memorial to lynching, every note about burnt schoolhouses and destroyed business districts, murder of leaders and bombed churches that failed to say exactly who had done it. She thought the insistence on victims without wrongdoers was the base of the whole American problem, the lie that supported all the others. She upset people. She jeopardized the whole project, and for nothing, said our more liberal colleagues. She was not correcting falsehoods, said the more conservative. She was adding revisionist addendums. They said these things to my face, assuming because we did not seem to be friends that I disagreed with her. My problem, alas, had never been as simple as Jeannie being wrong. In fourth grade, she'd been right about my hair. In high school, Jeannie might have found a nicer way to put it than, you know, they only keep telling you you're a good poet because they expect us to be illiterate. But my poetry wasn't actually as good as teachers praised for it. In grad school, Jeannie asked me once what my parents wanted for me, and I said they just wanted me to be happy. Jeannie said, that explains a lot. Then I said, what? And Jeannie said, I met a lot of Black women who had to learn it was okay to choose to be happy, but you're the only one I know who was raised to expect it. It was hard to reconcile people-pleasing Jeannie with abrasive Genevieve, but they had in common usually being correct. IPH disagreed and forced her out after just over a year and a dozen write-ups for policy violations. Being indignant on Genevieve's behalf was unsettling. The very fact of Jeannie being Genevieve was unsettling. Just as I was accepting that I had grown into as much of a different person as I was ever going to become, Genevieve showed up proving it was still possible to entirely reinvent herself. Perhaps in whatever years Jeannie was turning into Genevieve, I was supposed to have been turning into someone called Cassandra. Worse, perhaps I'd already turned into someone called Cassandra. Perhaps it was Cassandra who made her white colleagues feel so comfortable. They whispered to her while waiting for the coffee to brew or the microwave to ding, Genevieve, she's a lot, isn't she? Cassandra, whom the director trusted to fix Genevieve's missteps on behalf of the US government. Perhaps I'd been to Cassandra for some time now, walking around using some Boulder girl's name. Thank you. I have the honor of introducing Kirstin. Kirstin Chen's second novel, Bury What We Cannot Take, was named as the best book of the year by Entropy, Pop Sugar, and BookBub, and a top pick of the season by Electric Literature, The Millions, The Rumpus, Harper's Bazaar, and In Style. She is also the author of Soy Sauce for Beginners, an Amazon bestseller. Born and raised in Singapore, she lives in San Francisco, where she is working on a novel about the counterfeit handbag trade.
Thanks, Danielle. That was a wonderful reading. And thank you, Andrew, for putting this together. I'm going to read a short excerpt from the novel that I'm working on right now. It's called Counterfeit. It's centered around the luxury counterfeit handbag industry. It's a book about Asian Americans overthrowing the model minority stereotype. And it's also about what it means in this day and age to pursue the American dream. And so the chapter that I'm going to read, the main character of this book is a straight-laced, rule-abiding Chinese-American lawyer named Ava Wong, who gets pulled into her old college roommate's counterfeit handbag crime ring. And in this chapter, she goes to Guangzhou, China, to complete her first assignment. And so one thing to note about Guangzhou, China is that it's the fake handbag manufacturing capital of the world. And also in Guangzhou, counterfeits are sold out in the open in these giant shopping malls, just like regular merchandise. So it's just a part of the regular economy. Inside the mall, I peered into shop after tiny shop, ogling the handbags crammed onto shelves like grocery cans. These lower-tier stores stocked a hodgepodge of brands, a compilation of the luxury handbag industry's greatest hits. The Gucci Marmont next to the Chanel boy bag, next to the Louis Vuitton Speedy. The more upscale, higher-priced stores focused on single brands, Celine or Goyard, or Issey Miyake's Bao Bao line in every style and color ever dreamed up. The stores in the highest tier held prime locations right by the escalators. They were spacious and decorated with intention and had actual business names like Cherished Dreams Handbags and Revive the Nation Leather Goods. Taking their cues from real designer boutiques, they displayed each bag like a sculpture beneath a single spotlight. Across the way, a gargantuan chartreuse Birkin bag the size of a bassinet lured me into an immaculate store that sold only Hermes. With its opulent Instagram-worthy windows featuring random accessories for the haute bourgeois life of leisure, a backgammon set crafted entirely from untreated cowhide, a glossy horse saddle and matching riding crop, this store would not have been out of place on Madison Avenue or Rue Saint-Honoré. In addition to the large handbag section, a corner of the store was devoted to those iconic silk scarves, another to candy-colored enamel jewelry, a third to riotously patterned dishware. I lifted a Kelly bag in a vivid amethyst shade off the shelf and turned it this way and that, as though I knew what to look for. A sales associate dressed all in black except for an emerald and magenta silk triangle draped from her neck told me it was a brand new fall color. It's lovely, I admitted. How much? I converted yuan to dollars in my head and was sure I'd done the math wrong, so I sheepishly tapped the numbers into my phone. $1,400. How much did you say? I asked. She repeated the number. It's a good deal. Right, I said, I see. Winnie had said that the real thing went for 12 grand, so in a sense, the associate was right. I gingerly returned the bag to the shelf and left. The interaction put a damper on my sense of adventure, so I went straight to the 4th floor to complete what I'd come to do. It was late morning and the mall bustled with wholesale shoppers wheeling oversized suitcases that would soon bulge with merchandise to be displayed back in Manila and Buenos Aires and Moscow. Tucked away in the very back of the complex, 0421 was modestly decorated and badly lit and had no sign above the entrance. Winnie would later assure me that their workshop produced the most authentic-looking bags she'd ever come across, but they kept the good stuff hidden away whenever they were due for a police raid. I told the attendant, a model, thin young man with hollow cheeks, that I worked with Fang Wenyi, and he offered me a stool and a glass of hot tea before calling to check on my order. It's ready, he announced, and then went back to tapping on his phone. I looked around, wondering what I was supposed to do next. Pick the bags right off the shelves? I wasn't even certain which quilted design was the right one. I swallowed my tea and tried to formulate my question to hide my ignorance. I was still testing out different versions in my head when an older man burst in. He was short but muscular, sporting fashionably ripped jeans and pristine white high tops. Nice to meet you, nice to meet you. Come with me, he said. I was confused. Where? Now he was confused. Where? To get your bags. Oh, I said, good, let's go. He led me down a back staircase that reeked of cigarette smoke. You're American? He asked, scanning me from head to toe. Yes, that's why my Chinese is so bad. He laughed. It's decent. Where are we going? I asked. Down the road. He walked briskly, dodging motorcycles, ignoring traffic lights, and I fought to keep up, raising the palm of my hand to drivers in both a gesture of apology and a plea for them to brake before they hit me. The man turned down a narrow street and stopped in front of a shabby-looking apartment building. Here? I asked. He shot me a sidelong look. Yep. He pulled out a ring of keys and unlocked the front door. I followed him down a darkened hallway, listening for signs of life beyond the walls, sniffing the air for cooking smells. The building was eerily still. If, for some reason, I had to scream, would anyone come to my aid? He stopped before the last door on the hallway, and I sized him up. He was only a couple inches taller than me, but when he pushed open the door, his forearm flexed, displaying ropey muscles, bulging veins. He flicked on a light. A slim length of neon yellow glinted in his back pocket, a box cutter. I took a step back. Hold on, I said, pulling out my phone and studying the blank screen. Sorry, I have to take this call. He left the door ajar. I typed a message to Winnie. This man, older, short, muscular, wants me to go inside his apartment to get the bags. This can't be right. I stared at the screen, willing a response to appear. Who knew who else was inside that apartment, waiting for a naive American to stroll right through? I removed the money from my wallet, 2 measly 20s, and jammed them into my bra. I laced my house keys between my fingers and wondered if, when push came to shove, I'd really dare gouge out an eye. I checked my phone, no response. The man's head popped around the side of the door and I started. Ready? What choice did I have? I dropped my phone in my purse and went inside. Bulging jumbo-sized garbage bags filled the floor of the main room, which was unfurnished except for 2 plastic chairs and a plastic table with an overfilled ashtray, all pushed up against one wall. The door clicked shut and I heard the man turn the lock. Sweat surged beneath my arms, but my mouth went dry. Behind my back, I clenched my fingers around my keys. Want something to drink? He asked. I stammered, no thanks. He picked his way into the kitchen and emerged with 2 green bottles of beer, one of which he held out to me. I shook my head, and he shrugged and deposited the spare on the plastic table. He pulled the box cutter from his pocket, extended the blade, and deftly popped off the bottle cap before taking a long swig. I don't want to take up too much of your time, I said, speaking loudly to drown out my thrashing heartbeat. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and pointed the blade in my direction. I sucked in a breath. You and Fang Wenyi, he said. How long have you been working together? Only a short while, but we've known each other for 20 years. She's very capable, he said, but it sounded like a question. Yes, she's good at her job. He wagged the box cutter like a finger. Yes, too good. I wasn't sure what he meant. She got me in trouble with the big boss. He doesn't like the price she bargained me down to. Make sure she knows it's a one-time thing. I'll pass on your message, I said. I just follow instructions. I'm supposed to inspect the shipment? He stuck the box cutter in his back pocket, took another swig of beer, and belched softly. So where are the bags? I asked. My keys tumbled onto the floor and I bent to retrieve them. He narrowed his eyes. Why so antsy? You're in a rush? Yes, actually, my family's here in Guangzhou. I'm meeting them for lunch. My husband, my son. Your husband, he's American? I knew what he meant. Yes. What does he do? He's a surgeon. How old is your son? 12, I said, and then wondered why I bothered to lie. I pictured Ollie and my imaginary 12-year-old bursting through the door to rescue me. The man closed the distance between us, and like one giant muscle, my entire body tensed. When his hand went for his back pocket, a cry rose in my throat. He pulled out his phone. My son's 10, he said, almost as big as yours. He thumbed the screen and displayed an image of a chubby boy spinning a basketball on one finger. I could have collapsed onto the heap of garbage bags in relief. Very handsome, I said. Next up, I'm so thrilled to introduce Andrew Altschul, whose wonderful third novel, The Gringa, is the reason that all of us are here tonight. The Times of London calls it a multi-layered immersive novel in which the atmosphere and history of Peru leap off the page. And the Los Angeles Times says The Gringa is a story with an activist's righteous energy and a novelist's psychological depth. He is the author of the novels Deus Ex Machina and Lady Lazarus, and his work has appeared in Best New American Voices, Best American Non-Required Reading, O. Henry Prize Stories, and numerous journals and magazines. A former Wallace Stegner Fellow and Jones Lecturer at Stanford, he is contributing editor at Zyzzyva and the director of the Creative Writing Program at Colorado State University.
Thank you so much, Kirstin. I can't wait to read that novel. I can't wait to read Danielle's new collection. It's such an honor to read with all of you again. So thanks everybody for doing this event. I am going to read from The Gringa, which, as Kirstin said, came out last month. It concerns a 20-something American woman named Leonora Gelb, who finds her way to Lima in the 1990s, in the year after Peru's dirty war against the Shining Path, and will eventually be arrested, living in a house of leftist militants, tried in a military court, convicted and sentenced to life in a military prison. And it's loosely based on or inspired by the real life story of a woman named Lori Berenson. The section I'm going to read comes from the middle of the novel, when the narrator is trying to piece together some things about Leonora, or Leo's life, how she grew up, how she became radicalized. She's a girl from the New Jersey suburbs, and a Stanford alum. And so this scene takes place at Stanford and in San Francisco in 1991, on the eve of the first Gulf War. The only other character you need to know about is her recently ex-boyfriend, a graduate student named Martin, who lives in Berkeley in a house that seems to be a kind of neo-Black Panther cell. She returned from winter break to a campus galvanized by the prospect of war. There was a line in the sand, boots on the ground, American flags, and support our troops signs on the lawns of Palo Alto, as there were in Cannondale, New Jersey. "This is our Vietnam," cried the campus demonstrators. "Read my lips, no blood for oil," chanted students outside the Hoover Institute. There were honk-ins and walkouts, impromptu concerts on Sarah Quad. It all sounded the same to Leo: the angry speeches, the jingoistic grunting of pundits, blithe pronouncements of generals and senators who insisted that war was the last resort. Nothing would stop it. Anyone could see that. To its advocates and opponents alike, the idea of war had an almost sexual power, uniting them in a strange, ritualistic seduction, though no one could doubt who, in the end, would get fucked. On the night Bush's ultimatum expired, Leo drifted at the edge of a candlelight vigil under skies that seeped orange rain. "Save the Iraqis," read the homemade signs. "War is harmful to children." The students sang songs written before they were born. They hugged each other and cried real tears, and as midnight approached, they looked mournfully to the sky, as if expecting to see fighter jets in formation, slashing the darkness like a cat's claws. "These poor, poor people," a familiar voice said into her ear. "Where's your candle, Leo? What if old George is looking down, saying, 'If that redhead chick's got a candle, I'll call off the troops'?" The air smelled of patchouli oil and early jasmine, the fog so thick it felt cottony. She hadn't seen Martin in months, had refused to let herself leave pathetic messages. "Save your sympathy for the Iraqi people," she told Martin, groaning at her own cliche. "Old Sodom must be sleeping easier knowing these rich kids are on his side." She tried to punch him, but didn't have the energy. It was all pointless, the war, the candles, just another scripted drama. "What about you, Leo?" he said. "You on someone's side?" In San Francisco's Civic Center the next day, she followed Martin through a crowd of thousands, a surly and liquid mass that swelled and shifted, insinuating itself between buildings, swamping police lines, thumping drums and clanging pots and pans in an endless rattle that set the nerves on edge. The weather had cleared, the sky packed with fist-shaped clouds that wheeled around City Hall's gold dome. Speakers shouted into bullhorns, cursing President Bush and the oil companies. Signs stabbed the air. Stop the madness. Fags against war. An eye for an eye does not equal justice, as waves of outrage rolled through the plaza in deep orgasmic shudders. She hadn't eaten. Hunger and the buzz of coffee brought a sweat to her hairline. Unshowered under her long-sleeved shirt, she could smell her own slightly horsey scent mixed with his sharp musk. She was supposed to be in the library, working on an art history paper. While the bombs fell, while innocent people were maimed and incinerated, she was supposed to write a paper on Caravaggio. Unthinkable. She knew this was how most people lived, by somehow finding ways to write papers on Caravaggio while children in other countries were murdered, but Leonora would not be like most other people. If you're doing this, you gotta be ready, Martin had said at dawn. He told her to wear black, to take off her rings, leave her ID at home. They'd taken the train up from Palo Alto, and Leo practiced glaring at well-dressed commuters until they turned away. As the sun moved behind the stately buildings, the undertow shifted toward Market Street and the financial district. The crowd was still growing, fed by side streets, a cacophony of car horns met by angry howls. Leo's pulse banged in her head. Cops in riot gear lined the sidewalks, cries of pig and fascist followed by the crack of glass bottles against plastic shields, metal thuds as bodies were thrown across the hoods of cars. Martin pulled her through the current and into a courtyard where a dozen men and women clustered nervously. A pink-faced teenager with a shaved head and full-sleeve tattoos handed out ski masks. Leo clutched hers in both hands and looked at Martin. "You can still go home," he said. "Vámonos," the tattooed kid said. As they neared Powell Street, the crowd barely moving, Leo kept her eyes on Martin's back. Into her head came a litany of things she needed to do. The Caravaggio paper, another on Plath and Sexton. It was her turn to clean the co-op kitchen. Her father's birthday was next week, and she still had not bought him a gift. Her stomach hardened into a hot nut. Children were going to die for no reason, she reminded herself. What did Renaissance art matter? A few feet away, a naked woman painted with blue and orange flames hurled herself at a policeman. "You fucking murderers! You fucking baby killers!" The cop barely got his shield up in time. 3 others grabbed the woman's flailing limbs, and she growled deep in her throat and spat at one cop's face mask, and he pulled a canister from his belt and sprayed her in the eyes. Leo felt herself duck, felt something whiz overhead, and then a great shattering as the window of a shoe store evaporated. Her mind whirled. This was the real thing, not a lecture or a photograph. She looked up at the surrounding office buildings where tiny faces watched the melee from dozens of windows. She couldn't imagine what they saw. "Wait," Leo said, snatching at Martin's sleeve. He shrugged her off. The air was suddenly bitter with smoke. "Where are we going?" But he was already forging ahead. Someone handed her a length of heavy pipe, and then they were pushed apart by a riptide of bodies in skin-tight skeleton suits who rushed across the street, leaping onto cars and barreled full force into the police line. At the next intersection, the Chevron building soared skyward out of a cloud of white smoke, like the space shuttle on its launch pad. Its gilded revolving doors were guarded by an arc of police cruisers and orange water barrels, beyond which was mayhem, cops and protesters colliding, spinning in pairs as if it were a lurid high school dance. A fire engine edged forward, its sides crawling with people. She couldn't find Martin. She couldn't breathe through the smell of gasoline. The pipe hung heavy at her side. A surge in the crowd knocked her off balance, and when she righted herself, they were sprinting past. A dozen bodies in black masks, smashing into the cops with loud grunts and the clamor of metal on pavement, and then she was running after them, struggling to get closer to those golden doors. She could hear herself screaming. She stumbled and went down, and a pile of bodies fell on top of her and rolled and quickly scattered. There was another explosion. There were cops on the ground. She could hear the thud of clubs against soft tissue, taste filthy copper on her tongue, and as she climbed to her feet, a skeleton-suited body fell into her, and she shoved him back with an animal cry and shook herself free. Step by step, she pushed forward, dazzled by flames, until she was only a dozen yards from the revolving doors. When the smoke briefly cleared, she saw a body on the ground, set upon by 5 cops, one of whom tore off the attacker's mask, while the rest slammed nightsticks at his limbs, drove the butts into his belly, kicked at his ribs. She could not move. The sirens wailed, and the man on the ground curled up and rolled side to side, but she could not make herself move forward. And when the cop holding the mask took a running step and aimed his boot at Martin's head, Leo dropped the pipe she was still holding and ran. Eyes streaming, she elbowed across the current, stumbled on bottles and bricks and tripped at the curb, tearing the flesh from her palms as she fell. She dodged through a gap in the police line and headed away from Market Street, at each intersection turning from smoke and noise into the eerie stillness of downtown. She could hear herself panting and whimpering. She stopped on a dark corner to pull off the mask and retch hot mucus into a trash can. A fire engine screamed past and she started to run again. In Union Square, there were cops everywhere, lining every sidewalk. She wiped her nose, spat in the gutter, and ducked into the first set of doors to stand blinking and heaving in the crystal white light of Macy's perfume department. Later that night, the war would begin. Baghdad lit up with tracer fire, glowing submarine green on CNN, the silent and unreal world of alien life forms doomed to extinction. There would be tomcats and prowlers, hellfire and scuds, bombs that found their targets and bombs that found something else. Human shields, Abrams tanks, retreating Iraqi soldiers slaughtered from the air. There would be stories about US arms sold to Saddam, doctored satellite photos, PR firms paid to invent Iraqi atrocities. And through it all, you could hear the chatter of Wolf Blitzer and Bernie Shaw, the stern compassion of Tom Brokaw, and the bland assurances of the president, who that first night explained to us there are things worth fighting for. But in this moment, there was only the chilly light of the showroom, the tick and buzz of fluorescents, the whispers of other customers when they caught sight of the girl in black with a livid face and bleeding hands. Is there something I can help you with? A skinny Asian saleswoman stood flanked by two coworkers. They closed ranks at the Chanel counter, trying to maintain their staged elegance like figures in a Nagel sketch that someone is about to burn. No, I'm... Leah was shaky-kneed, her blood pounding. Police cars wailed past on Stockton Street, blue light fracturing across the mirrored counters. I'm okay, she said. I'm sorry, said the saleswoman, but you'll have to leave. Leah forced her breathing to slow. I'm looking for the men's department. The woman folded her arms. Willing her hand not to shake, Leah took her Stanford Visa card from her pocket and summoned a voice learned in the shopping malls of her youth. I'm here to buy a birthday present for my father. Is there a problem? And before they could reply, she spotted the escalator and strode past the women with chin high. She rode up 3 flights, swallowing ripples of sobs, washed her face in the ladies' room and browsed a good long time until her eyes dried, her limbs stopped shaking, until she found the perfect gift, a silk tie, an abstract blaze of blue and red, designed, the label said, by Jerry Garcia. Thanks, everyone. Thanks. I now get to introduce one of my oldest and closest friends, Joshua Furst, whose critically acclaimed novel, Revolutionaries, was published last year. He's also the author of The Sabotage Cafe, named to the 2007 year-end best of lists of the Chicago Tribune, the Rocky Mountain News, and the Philadelphia City Paper, as well as being awarded the 2008 Grub Street Fiction Prize. And Short People, a collection of stories, and with the illustrator Katie Wu, The Little Red Stroller, a picture book for children. His work has appeared in, among other periodicals, Esquire, Salon, the Chicago Tribune, Bomb, and The Forward, where he's a contributing editor. He's a graduate of the University of Iowa Writers Workshop and currently teaches at Columbia University. Take it away, Josh.
Thanks, Andrew. And thanks everybody else. It's an honor to be reading with all of you. I wanted to just, planes slashing the darkness like a cat's claw. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. That was at the early portion of Andrew's reading just now. So I'm going to be reading from my novel Revolutionaries, which came out in paperback about 3 weeks ago. Revolutionaries is about a 60s anarchist prankster raconteur named Lenny Snyder, and sort of chronicles what happens when he first becomes the zeitgeist, and then when the zeitgeist, as the zeitgeist always does, finds a new object of affection. But it's also about his son, Freedom Snyder, who is the narrator of the book, and how he experienced his chaotic, entirely lawless childhood with Lenny. So the book's really a complaint lodged at Lenny from Freedom. It's also an oral history. Freedom is telling the story to some unnamed and invisible interviewer now. So it has the perspective of looking back. I'm going to be reading from basically right up front, and I think it should all be pretty self-explanatory. So here we go. I also wanted to say that this is going out to John Prine. Call me Fred. I hate freedom. That's some crap Lenny dreamed up to keep people like you talking about him. And it worked, right? I mean, you didn't drive all the way up here with your tape recorder and backpack full of good intentions to learn about me. I'm just the kid. What you want is more of him. More of the 60s hoopla, all that rebel music, the tie-dyes and free love and taking it to the streets. Even now, 28 years after he died, you can't get enough. So fine. It's been like that my whole life. Who am I to judge? By the time Lenny was the age I am now, he'd changed the world, or anyway, that's what he would have claimed. And me? I'm just some dude who's done some carpentry, some bathtub restoration, sustained myself by staying out of sight. I've worn ironic t-shirts and thought ironic thoughts about the commodification of revolution. Worked at coffee shops and bookstores, whatever it took. I've run some scams. I've had scams run on me. I've deflected and I've survived. If there's one thing you learn when you're Lenny Snyder's son, is how to bullshit your way through to the next day. But really, I don't know anything about anything except Lenny. Except Lenny, I guess. I know a lot about him. I know I let him down, but he let me down too. Why? How? Well, where to start? I guess with him. Lenny Snyder, Alpha, Omega. This might take some time. You want coffee? I've got an instant. If Lenny were here, he might tell you about the time he and his freak army stormed Grand Central Station, the place from which the life of the city flowed, with its train schedules dictating the rhythms of industry, funneling the commuting motchers from their homes in Westchester into its clogged chambers and spitting them out into this metropolis, where their time no longer belonged to them. Grand Central was the cinch in the hourglass. Break it, and you'd unleash who knew what. Ancient winds, blowing a million grains of sand over this vast, seething, overpopulated land. First in small, then larger groups, in platoons, in battalions, his freak army slouched into the great Art Deco Church of Time. They carried presents bound by string, and at precisely 5 o'clock, they pulled the cords and outsoared festive balloons, each one streaming a banner imprinted with a word: peace, and love, and laugh, and fuck, but also war, and kill, and death. Pick your poison, take one home. There was another balloon, much larger than the rest. This one dangled a canvas sack, dollar signs stamped right on it like a crazy cat gag come to life. Reach for it, as many people tried to do, and you'd release real money. Shades of the stock exchange, but this time the bills rained down on decent, average Americans. People picked them up, studied them, and they noticed a message stamped minutely on each one. Enjoy this free money. Go buy yourself an ice cream. While you eat it, consider how lucky you are that this isn't napalm. If it were, you'd be dead. More freaks tumbled into the chamber, overrunning the commuters, gobbling up all available space. They sang songs, they chanted, they strummed acoustic guitars and ate pastrami sandwiches. They toked up or took acid and watched the constellations on the ceiling dance. They whispered sweet nothings into a corner, and someone on the other side of the room heard them and whispered sweet nothings back. They sat on the railing of the great stairwells. They perched on the counters of the cashier's windows. They scaled the information booth, and from this roost sent messages ricocheting around the room. Time is an illusion. Poetry is in the street. Commodities are the opium of the people. Boredom is counter-revolutionary. Concrete breeds apathy. We are all undesirables. Time is an illusion. We'll say it again. Time is an illusion. Kill time, kill time, kill time. And then someone reached out and snapped the hands off the landmark clock atop the booth, and the pigs swept in. They'd been watching and waiting for their chance. Truncheons out and swinging, they squeezed in from all sides. 4 new walls of bristly, engorged pink flesh constricting around Lenny and his tribe. There was nowhere to run. Bones were broken, heads cracked, another ass kicking, this one more intense and dramatic than the last. It was beautiful, Lenny would say. The cops went ahead and made our point for us. He marched them up to Morningside Heights to invade the citadel on the hill where Columbia University shielded its students from the brute repercussions of their entitlement. He took the hippest undergrads on a campus tour. Here's the building where the science labs are housed. PhD candidates, tenured professors. They submit proposals. The school approves them, or it doesn't. Some of them are given budgets to fund their experiments. The money comes from grants, and that's where things get interesting. Who provides the grants? You want to guess? He's chewing gum, blowing bubbles, fucking around with a translucent yellow yo-yo he bought from some subway hawker on his way uptown. There's a charger inside that revs when he flicks the string, and the yo-yo lights up like a carnival game. Oil companies, pharmaceuticals, the US Department of Defense. Since the school wants money and the scientists wants the labs, the proposals are tailored to appeal to these benefactors. That building right there, that's where napalm was invented. Agent Orange, too. The hounds of hell. Use your imagination. Whatever you dream up will be much less terrifying than the reality they're concocting in there. Is that right? Is that just? Does this surprise you at all? He's flicking that yo-yo up and down, windmilling it. Come on, let's take a stroll down Amsterdam, see where your tuition money really goes. While we're walking, I'm going to give you a pop quiz. You kids are good at tests. You must be. You're driven, ambitious. I see it in your eyes. Your entire lives have been dedicated to casing the system so you come out on top. And now here you are at an elite institution of higher learning. I'm curious about what they're teaching you, so tell me. Who's the largest landholder in New York City? No. It's not. No. It's the Catholic Church. Who's number 2? That's right, Columbia. A nonprofit dedicated to the public good, by the way, at least according to the school's charter. The gum has been wedged in his cheek this whole time to free his tongue for speechifying. Now he molds it into a ball with his teeth, and then thwat, spits it with expert aim at a pig cruiser double parked in front of the bodega. He's still at it with the yo-yo, too. You see that building there, he asks, jutting his chin at a 5-story brick facade in desperate need of repointing? That's one of their properties. The one next to it, too. The whole block belongs to them. Everything from here to 132nd Street and on over to Frederick Douglass. They don't look so bad from here, but step inside and see what you find. Wouldn't be hard to do. The locks are all broken. Some of those apartments haven't had running water for 2 years. Families living 12 to a room. Aunts, uncles, granny, great-granny, everyone shoved into 600 square feet. They have to beg Ernesto at the Cuban Chinese every time they want to take a shit. Your august institution of higher learning doesn't give 2 fucks about people like them. Not like it does about you. They're collateral, property, pawns it can use to subsidize the verdant lawns of your campus, the passionate conversations in your classrooms, the catered meet and greets with your faculty, and of course, the sulfurous experiments taking place in the bowels of Poopin Hall. You want to know how much Columbia loves you? Let's cut through these projects over toward Columbus. There's a park over there, basketball courts, a playground, some grass where the locals can spread out blankets and have picnics. In summer, that fountain there is clogged with little black and brown kids, shrieking as they charge through the water, cherishing this brief respite from the sweltering claustrophobia of their apartments. A nice park. Not the prettiest you've ever seen, but it does the job. My question for you is, do you want these kids to keep playing in the park? To experience fresh air? To know what it feels like to run for a better reason than because the pigs are chasing them? I thought so, but listen, Columbia University does not. Columbia University believes these people don't deserve their shitty little park. Columbia University believes it has a responsibility to build you a new multi-million-dollar gym in this park. A swimming pool, a weight room, handball courts, anything your little hearts desire. It wants to please you, to make you comfortable. It wants you to know how special you are. And once the gym's built, you better believe Columbia University's not going to let anybody but you use it. Is that fair? They're taking these people's park away and giving it to you, who have so much already. Is that just? I don't think so either. Aren't you sick of the lies and hypocrisy? He flipped the yo-yo into a cat's cradle, held it there for a dramatic second, spinning futilely with nowhere to go. Columbia University belongs to you. What do you think would happen if you told President Kirk that you refuse to learn the lies they've been teaching you? Ever so slightly, he tugged the string, and the yo-yo bounced and spun incrementally faster. That you refuse to take part in bullying the people who live under the university's heel. Another pull, another bounce. That you know what freedom is, and this ain't it. Another pull, this time with such force that the yo-yo flew up out of its cradle and swung around the finger to which it was tied. Let's liberate this school from its shackles. Pinwheeling the yo-yo faster and faster until finally he fell to a knee, slammed his palm to the ground, and shattered the fucking thing against the sidewalk. I've got 100 friends right over there just waiting for the word to help you do it. And lo, his freak army rose up behind a chain link fence. They pressed forward, fists raised in revolutionary salute, thrusting their weight into the grid of metal, pushing and churning and knocking the fence down. They marched on, the students and Lenny with them, up the hill, onto the campus, taking on more students at every turn. And when they reached Low Library, where Kirk kept his offices, they invaded and pushed everyone else out. Anyone who challenged what they were doing, anyone who maybe just didn't care. They barricaded doors. They encamped and proclaimed the university free. They liberated it and then occupied the premises for 6 days until the pigs goose-stepped in and again showed the good people of this nation the brute force their government and muddied interests were willing to bring down on anyone, even their own children, if they dared ask what the fuck was going on. He'd say, with each loss, our army grew, the whole country on our side against the war, against the pigs and their vicious pig-like ways. When the press asked him, okay, but what are you fighting for? He said, fighting? Who's fighting? Not us. We're piecing. And since I'd been born by then, he raised my squirming body to the camera and said, we're piecing for freedom. Thanks. And now I am going to introduce Ramona. Ramona Ausubel is the author of 2 novels and 2 story collections. Her most recent book, Awayland, was a New York Times Editor's Choice selection, a finalist for the California Book Award, Colorado Book Award, and longlisted for the Story Prize. She is the recipient of the PEN USA Fiction Award, the Cabell First Novel Award, and was a finalist for the New York Public Library Young Lions Award. Her work has appeared in the New Yorker, the New York Times, Tin House, One Story, Plowshares, and many other journals. She teaches in the Low-Residency MFA program at the Institute of American Indian Arts and at Colorado State University. Welcome, Ramona.
Hello, thank you, Joshua. Thanks for organizing this, Andrew. It's so nice to see friends and this is great. I love this. I love this cozy little evening together. So I'm going to read a little section of my second novel, Sons and Daughters of Ease and Plenty. It's about a family, a very wealthy family that loses its money suddenly. But the part that I'll read is sort of from before that. So the things you need to know, this is 1950s North Shore of Chicago, super upper class, big houses. And the main characters are Fern and Edgar. And Edgar's family is new money, and his mom spends a huge amount of time and effort trying to fit in and not to be too showy and be, hit just the right balance. And his dad wishes that they could buy way more nice stuff. And Fern's family is very old money, super established, and has no questions about their place here. And I think that's pretty much what you need to know. This is like the wanting to change the world gone wrong, or at least really badly misunderstood. All right. Before Halloween, Edgar told his mother that he wanted to have Fern's family over for Christmas dinner. Mary saw in her mind the effort and peril of a white linen tablecloth and a roast goose, 100 side dishes, each of which could be ruined 100 different ways. "You had better really like this girl," she said. Nothing would secure their stead better than a marriage into such an old family, Mary knew. She also knew that she would have to be the one to prove their worth again and again to these old moneys. For the next 6 weeks, she thought of nothing but Christmas Eve. She had the cook practice each dish 6 times. She tried 12 different floral arrangements. She opened every drawer in the house every day to make sure that to make sure that on the night of the party, someone would go snooping and find a mouse nest in the one place she had forgotten to check. Mary was a woman at war. Edgar came home 2 weeks later reading the Communist Manifesto. He and Mary sat together at the big dining room table while she polished the 400-piece set of silver, and he read aloud. "Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbances of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguish the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones," he read. "Edgar, I have no idea what any of that means." No, here's where it gets good," he started again. "All that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with sober sense the real conditions of life, which are that the proletariat is forced to fight for decent pay and rights. It's class war, Mother." "Do you know where you grew up?" she said. "Do you know whom you have invited for Christmas Eve dinner?" "Fern's different," Edgar said. "We're both different." He left the table with his book. He tried sitting in his room, but it was the room of a rich kid. He tried sitting in the living room, but the walls of leather-bound books and mahogany shelves could not be described as proletariat. He tried sitting on the porch, but it was 25 degrees outside. Finally, Edgar would settle into the barn. He had to overlook the horse tack and the fact that it was heated. He was sure Russian horses did not need heated stalls. But at least it smelled like animal shit. At least the ground was covered in hay. Christmas Eve arrived with Fern in a red velvet dress with a wide skirt, her hair pinned into a neat twist, and her mother in the usual black, her hair short, her lips red. Mary hugged the girl and Fern hugged her back. She was warm and pretty and complimented the light display. "You are very sweet," Mary said. Edgar took Fern to the parlor window to look at the snow fort he had built behind the house. It was bluish in the dark and almost glowing. "Will you move in with me?" he teased. "How many bathrooms?" she asked. The goose came out hot and glistening, and the mashed, stewed, baked, and broiled sides were all pristine. Mary said quiet prayers of thanks. If she could have, she would have gone upstairs for the rest of the evening to cry tears of relief. Conversation was pleasant, wine was poured at the correct rate, the children looked at one another across the table in a way that made the adults nostalgic for their youth. It was the Christmas Eve they had all been hoping for, until Fern's father turned to Edgar and asked him about his studies. "I'm studying Marx," Edgar said, "and I'm finding it very interesting." Fern's father was quiet, as one ought to be if one wants the dinner to proceed without incident. But Hugh could not leave the statement alone. "You give your child everything and he comes home from Yale a communist. Aren't we busy fighting a war over this?" Edgar muttered something about the war being criminal and the family being a bourgeois institution. Fern's mother excused herself and went to the powder room. Hating the world was plenty familiar, but saying so in better company was unacceptable. Paul sat very quietly arranging butter on his bread. Edgar said things about private property and the capitalist agenda and heavy progressive graduated income tax, and his father said, "You are a spoiled shit." And his mother, whose hands were pink and shaking, said, "What did I do to deserve you for my only child?" When Evelyn returned, they all went quiet for a moment, remembering their manners. Edgar stood up. "I'm sorry. I apologize. I shouldn't have brought up such topics on a holiday." He looked at the faces of his parents, his sweetheart, her parents. I asked for this evening for a reason, he said. His voice started to crack and he wrung his napkin. I wanted to ask Fern, he said, turning to her, I wanted to ask you to marry me. Before her father wondered whether his was the approval that the boy should have sought first, Fern stood to meet him and took both of his hands. Of course I will, she said. I thought you just said family was a bourgeois institution, Hugh tried to say. Shut up, Mary told him. Shut up right now. The boy and girl did not hear his parents fighting, and they did not hear her parents try to find enough air in the room. There she goes, thought Evelyn, just as I expected. Next, she'll call to say she's pregnant. Paul felt a needle stab of pain. No one had ever looked at him the way the young couple was looking at each other. Mary was up all night, and the words that banged in her head were, fuck it. Fuck the roast goose and the 400 pieces of silver. Fuck the book club and the flower show and the appropriate light display. She went into Edgar's room and found him reading by candlelight. You're right, she said. It's all bullshit. The entire thing is bullshit. He kissed her on the forehead, the second most important kiss of his life, and both in the same night. But she would not relinquish her worldly possessions and join the movement to unionize the workers. She was not going to rage against private property or call for socialized medicine. By morning, by the time the Christmas sun rose over the pale pink bricks of their home, Mary had made a different kind of upending. There was French toast on the table, and Edgar and Hugh each had an envelope on his plate. They sat down, poured orange juice. Open them, Mary said. Those are your presents from me. Hugh went first. In his envelope was a hand-drawn map of an island with little palm trees and arrows pointing to various features, including a mermaid lagoon and a harbor. We still have to work out the details, Mary said. A map? He asked. It's an island. It's in the Caribbean. I'm buying it for you for Christmas. Mary's voice was flash bright. This is not real, he said. I don't care anymore. I don't care what all these fucking people think. We have so much money. We should be having fun. From now on, fun. Hugh could not get to his wife fast enough. He picked her up in his arms and kissed her hard on the neck. What else will we buy? He asked. Cars, she said. Boats, a plane. We can go anywhere we want. An island? Edgar was disgusted. Have you thought about the people who already live there? But no one was listening to him. His parents were kissing in a way he had never seen them kiss, in a way that made him feel extra, unwanted, in the way. Quietly, he opened his own envelope. In it was a piece of paper that read, Ticket, at the top. Below, it said, Your freedom. Go be a communist. Travel to Africa. Learn to play the flute. No questions asked. What is this? Edgar asked. Mary broke from her embrace, her face pink and full. When you're ready, you can come back and earn a living with us. I'll put enough in your account to hold you and Fern for a few years. You don't have to keep the money if you don't want to. Give it to the natives, or you can keep it and believe it's evil. I don't care. Do whatever you want. What if I don't come back? You'll come back. You'll see. The room sounded different. The whole house. They ate too much for breakfast and too much for lunch, too. It was a good day to be a family, freedom sudden as a drug in their veins. They walked outside and admired the dry, solemn tendrils of a weeping willow and the steady green of a pine. I can't wait for tomorrow, Hugh said. Tomorrow we shop. You know, I really disagree with what you're about to do, Edgar said. I know you do, sweetheart, his mother said, and we think your ideas are nonsense. None of them could remember having been happier. Thank you. So that is all of us. I don't know, are there questions? Did any questions come in? Anybody get any questions?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think Jack would know better than any of us. Jack, you're muted, but I think we've gone a little over what we expected to do. I can unmute you. There you go.
There we go. Hello. Yeah, no, that was phenomenal, you guys. Really, thank you all so much for sharing your time on Passover and for all the attendees tonight. on Passover holiday. If I were emceeing this in a live setting, I would say one more time for Andrew, Joshua, Kirstin, Ramona, and Danielle. Really fabulous. Thank you again for sharing your work. All of you who are watching, please go support these authors at litquake.org, Venmo, and buy their books at your favorite bookstore that's online, or go to bookshop.org. It was really a great idea, Andrew. Thank you so much for bringing it to us.
Jack.
It was really really fantastic, and I'm like personally very interested in reading all of your work. Tomorrow night at the same time, we're going to be featuring a showcase from World Editions, this international publisher based in the Netherlands and in New York, and we will be featuring authors, God willing, the software holds, from the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, Australia, and France. So thank you all again for tuning in. Have a great night, and wash your hands.
Thank you, Litquake.
All right.
Thanks, Jack and Jane.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jack. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.